Hello, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, and I'm really thrilled to be here for this show to talk to you about a really fascinating topic, phytoestrogens. Really, it's so amazing when you consider that there are plants that can have amazing interactions with our hormone receptors. I'm going to give you 4 top reasons why every woman should include phytoestrogens in their diet. Of course, I'm going to discuss exactly what phytoestrogens are, and then I'm going to give you a whole bunch of foods that contain phytoestrogens. I call it eating for femininity when you include phytoestrogens in your diet. These are plants that actually have these magical ingredients called polyphenols that actually combine with our hormone receptors for estrogen and create very healthful impacts. So let's begin with the 4 very important reasons why you'd want to include phytoestrogens in your diet. Well, first is to help alleviate menopausal symptoms, night sweats, and hot flashes. There was a really fascinating study in the last 12 months that showed that women who ate the phytoestrogen-containing food, soy, that they ate a cup of whole organic soy, like soybeans, every day for 12 weeks in a row. And guess what? These women who were in the early stages of menopause and had very substantial night sweats and hot flashes saw almost or complete relief of these really harmful and life-altering, very disruptive symptoms. How amazing is that? By eating phytoestrogen-containing soy in the whole organic form, they were able to alleviate one of the cardinal disabling symptoms that women endure. In fact, 80% of women will suffer from such symptoms, which are disturbing to quality of life and also quality of health in many, many ways. So that alone would be substantial enough reason for every peri and menopausal woman to include a cup of organic soy. What would be another reason? How about cardiovascular health? So a study published in 2016 showed that eating phytoestrogen foods can reduce the development of atherosclerosis. It helped to maintain vascular health, which is, of course, talking about the health of arteries. It helped to prevent unwanted blood clots and reduced inflammation, which is what underlies hypertension and the development of plaques and unstable plaque, which can lead to heart attacks and strokes. So that is another very amazing benefit. Now, how about this one? Women who undergo assisted reproductive technology like IVF, when they use soy products in their diet, what happened? They had more success with having IVF. And part of that apparently is involved with the chemical endocrine disruptor that's called BPA. BPA is found in hard plastics, can liners, cash register receipts, and it's really in everyone. Unfortunately, when they do studies of BPA, over 90% of people will have a significant amount in their bodies. It also concentrates in the fetus when women are pregnant. Well, it turns out BPA, which is an endocrine disruptor for estrogen and other hormones as well, that when you eat the phytoestrogens, in this case soy, guess what? It helped to alleviate the negative effects of BPA. Now, the study was on women seeking pregnancy, but what this really implies, and although we don't have a lot of studies, I would say it's good circumstantial evidence that this kind of food will help everyone to alleviate the harmful effects of this really terrible endocrine disruptor, BPA. So we don't want that to be in our lives or in our diets. Before I get to the 4th one, and maybe a 5th one, I'm going to jump into what are some of the foods with phytoestrogens. Well, I've already mentioned soy. Soy contains the isoflavone. This is a polyphenol, and that's what's called, the isoflavones from soy. these are now then broken down in the body into other types of derivatives like genistein. And these are very, very healthful. So everyone should, unless you have an allergy or reaction, try to include a few servings of soy in their diet on a weekly basis. And it should always be whole organic soy. You definitely don't want to include soy pretending to be turkey or ice cream or that type of thing. We're talking about the whole soybean, tofu, tempeh, which is the fermented, or miso. So some servings every week of a whole organic soy product. You can also include organic soy milk, which I personally love in coffee and also in tea, and my whole organic cocoa that I make. Now, I just mentioned coffee. Well, guess what? Coffee has phytoestrogens in it as well. How about flax seeds? Flax seeds contain the type of phytoestrogen called lignin. So soy has the phytoestrogens that are called isoflavones, and flaxseed has the lignins. And then there's ellagic acid. Ellagic acid is found in many fruits and vegetables, the most famous being pomegranates. You've probably heard that pomegranate is considered a superfood, but you may have wondered why. Now, there are many other wonderful ingredients in pomegranates, but ellagic acid is really amazing, and there's now published data that this is helpful for preventing cancer, and not just the formation of cancer, but also the spread of cancer, cancer cells proliferating, and also seems to help to make chemotherapy more efficacious. So that is a pretty amazing thing. So that was my number 4, and I'm going to get to a number 5. I'm going to throw that in just a moment. So let me list a few different foods that have a lot of these different type of phytoestrogens. Well, soy, now I mentioned that already. So what kind of a food is soy? Soy is a legume. So what are other legumes? Well, there are beans, not just soybeans. All kinds of beans are actually phytoestrogen containing, and that's amazing. How about lentils? Also grains, things like oats, barley, wheat bran, rice bran. These all have phytoestrogens. Berries, I had mentioned, pomegranates. Well, how about berries? Strawberries, and I mentioned grapes. Now, what other types of things? Apples, carrots, pumpkin, and seeds. I mentioned flax seeds. How about sesame seeds, sunflower seeds? All of those foods contain phytoestrogens. How about walnuts and peanuts and almonds? They all contain phytoestrogens. So many of the foods that you know are healthy, part of the reason that they're so healthy is because they are phytoestrogens. Now, phytoestrogens, this is the amazing thing, they contain these magical ingredients that bind to estrogen receptors. Now, you may think, well, that sounds terrible. What if you didn't want all that estrogen? Well, number 1, estrogen is wonderful. If you don't know that, you got to go listen to my previous talks. Number 2, because estrogen regulates and modulates the immune system and the inflammation system, like the start and stop, like the on-off switch of inflammation. So that's a critically important thing. Now, I mentioned, for example, that the phytoestrogen ellagic acid helps to prevent cancer and helps to improve chemotherapy for cancer. And also, phytoestrogen isoflavones from soy may help to reduce the risk of breast cancer. That's a little controversial. There's pros and cons, and it may have to do with when you start it. For example, that you may have to start eating it in childhood like they do in many Asian countries. And if you start later in life, it still is very healthful, but it may be too late that maybe breast cancer has already started. There is a little controversy on that one. But these foods that contain these phytoestrogens can bind to estrogen receptors, turn them on or off in ways that are amazing. There are estrogen receptors in every cell in the body, and it is really fantastic. In terms of some of the cancers, I mentioned perhaps breast cancer. In terms of ellagic acid, the data is strongest for prostate cancer and colon cancer. And also there's data on preventing lung cancer. So now here's the fifth one. I said I'd throw in a bonus. How about acne? So there is some data, there's never enough when you deal with food, but some that eating foods with phytoestrogens can reduce the incidence and severity of acne, which plagues 90% of teenagers and many adults well past the teen years. Now, if you have listened to all the foods, the amazing foods that have phytoestrogens, guess what? What it seems to amount to is eating a diverse, incredibly healthy plant-based diet. Because notice what I didn't mention. I didn't mention a single animal. So all the phytoestrogens I mentioned were seeds and nuts and grains and legumes, fruits and vegetables. Just about every single category of plant, in fact, every single category of plant has many foods that actually have in them the ability to bind with estrogen receptors in positive ways to help to maintain the immune system, to help to maintain cellular function and energy. It's amazing. Plants, we now know, produced many of the health benefits that we enjoy and really seek out because they contain this magic ingredient called phytoestrogens. So go be sure and eat some today, tomorrow, and every single day. They're wonderful to taste and wonderful for your health. Thanks so much for joining me. Hope to see you soon.